Welcome to lecture number 8, Mixed Strategies and Methods. Before we start discussing mixed strategies and methods, we need to do a sort of comparative review or contrast, and also to note the common denominators between quantitative and qualitative strategies. To begin with, whereas quantitative research design put an emphasis on translating their outputs into numbers, qualitative research design put an emphasis on words, on explaining as thick as possible the observations. Whereas quantitative research design build their methods around the point of view of the researcher and how researchers prefer to study their object, qualitative research design are at pains in order to gather the perspectives of the subjects or participants of their study. This is why it is claimed that quantitative research design are creating distances between researchers and participants, whereas qualitative research design enable researchers to immerse and to come close to their subjects of study. It is also claimed that quantitative research design are mainly about testing existing theories. On the other hand, qualitative research design are generally built in order to produce some new conceptual understanding. Quantitative research design picture many times a static image of the social reality, whereas for qualitative researcher, social life is always about processes, and researchers in qualitative research design attempt to present the reality of those processes in the way they elaborate and analyze their findings. In terms of how we put together the methods, the techniques to mine and gather the data, quantitative research design are much more structured than qualitative research design, where there is a certain flexibility in the way researchers use and combine different techniques. Quantitative research studies try to offer a generalization of the topic that they are trying to study in order to be applicable to similar projects, whereas qualitative research design always stress that their understandings, their findings should be contextualized. Because quantitative research design borrow the way to do research from the natural science, and they try to translate their findings into numbers, we tend to claim that they offer reliable data that will be analyzed and offer conclusions. Whereas the sort of data that qualitative research design gather and use to analyze is generally very detailed and rich because it focuses on very precise context. Quantitative researchers try to look at macro phenomena in social life, whereas qualitative researchers tend to focus on the micro, that is, on very specific and limited social settings. Quantitative research design put an emphasis on understanding behavior, whereas qualitative research design try to offer us meaning in terms of how people live their social lives. This is more or less a comparison that contrasts the different aspects of research designs between quantitative and qualitative formats. However, it is very important to stress that this is a sort of dichotomy that we are offering here in this table. And in reality, when we engage in research design strategies, this is less emphasized in the sense that our designs are much more flexible in the way they are put together compared to this very extreme way of comparing the aspects and qualities of these two ways of doing research. Few more words about comparing quantitative and qualitative research designs before we try to say something about what mixed strategies is. In terms of the orientation to the role of theory in the research, we mentioned before that quantitative research designs are more deductive in their orientation, that is, they generally test some aspect of an existing theory to see if can be proved again or perhaps the opposite, whereas qualitative research design are more inductive in their orientation, which means that they tend to attempt at generating some new component of a theory. In terms of the epistemological orientation of these two formats, we know that quantitative research design draw their spirit, if you like, in the sense of how they do research, from the natural science model, whereas qualitative research design are interpretivist in the way they refer to the production of knowledge. And lastly, in terms of their ontological orientation, whereas quantitative research design are objectivist, that is, they refer to the social components of life as given. Qualitative research design are constructionist, which means that they take into account the agency of human subjects in the way they construct the institutions and the other components of social life that they are part of. If we focus only on the comparison that we just presented in the last few minutes, then we can easily make an argument against mixing strategies and methods when putting together a research design to study some topic. And this is because these two models or formats of doing research are based on very different epistemological and ontological commitments. They not only use a different toolkit of techniques and method to study social life, but they have very different assumptions about what social life is, and they also try to present for us a different way of understanding what social life is. So again, if we only rely on this comparison, we may be tending to argue against mixing strategies and methods from quantitative and qualitative research designs. On the other hand, there are firm similarities between quantitative and qualitative research. Both types of doing research answer research questions about the nature of social reality. In other words, both ways of doing social research try to understand social reality. Both ways of doing research also try to reduce a variety of data and try to make sense of it, whatever the techniques they use to analyze that data. They still try to offer some understandings about social reality. Both ways of doing research anchor their ways of doing research in existing literature. Also, both are concerned about frequency, that is, what is the behavior, the practices, or the way of living in society that repeats itself, that is frequent, something that can be referred to as perhaps normality. And on the other hand, both ways of doing research are also concerned with what is not the normal trend, that is, variation or the marginal. Now, when you put together all these points, we understand that there are not only contrasts between these two ways of doing research, but there are also strong similarities. In the next few minutes, we are going to watch a short video that illustrates how to bring together quantitative and qualitative strategies and methods in a given study.
Russia versus Italy.
Playing a video game on an iPad isn't unusual. This game, called Coin Soccer, is quick-paced, requiring some dexterity and good eye-hand coordination. And the goal, if you'll excuse the pun, is to score 3 goals
Oh, I got it.
before the computer does. Some players struggle to move the coin-like objects, and they all get the whistle for illegal moves.
I hate it when that happens.
But what they each do after playing Coin Soccer is very unusual.
I can't seem to move the coin when I'm swiping with my finger.
They enter their personal reactions in a journal.
I also began to learn by watching as the computer moved its coins.
It's all part of research being conducted by Dr. John Creswell, an applied research methodologist here at the University of Nebraska. Creswell is interested in gaming research, and his goal is to develop a survey that can be given to hundreds of people. A survey is a traditional method of collecting quantitative information, such as means and distributions. But a journal is one way of getting an in-depth picture of player reactions, which can then assist in survey development.
That might really get at people's experiences.
Such experiences are a type of qualitative data.
I think it may become boring over time.
Creswell could have developed his final survey by simply field testing a set of pilot questions. In other words, using a preliminary quantitative measure, a pilot survey, to develop his final survey. But there are advantages to adding a qualitative step.
So it gives you kind of the rich detail that no survey instrument, no quantitative measure is really going to give you.
The integration of qualitative and quantitative data is called mixed methods research, a field Creswell helped to pioneer.
Hey, thanks for coming in today. I really appreciate your time.
And Creswell will illustrate how to conduct a mixed methods study.
We're going to talk a little bit about playing that coin soccer video game.
These 8 participants have played coin soccer for 2 weeks now, and this focus group is a second qualitative phase that will be used to supplement their journals.
It gives you more detail, for one. It gives you personal stories, anecdotes.
First, whom do they think the game's appropriate for?
I think it's a good game for anyone 10 or above.
And one player suggested her grandfather.
It's so easy, and he's 90, and all you have to do is just flick it. So I could see him enjoying that, actually.
There were areas of disagreement about the game.
The biggest skill that I would take away from it is patience.
I like the complexity of the movement of the coin when you flick it, deciding when to let go.
It was hard to get the coin to where I wanted it to go all the time, so that got a little frustrating, and you get bored quickly when you're not good at it.
And it also gives you the variation. We had quite a few people with different perspectives going on in there.
And some were critical.
It has a real sterile, quiet feel to it.
I thought I had shot my coin, but I hadn't. It was still there, and then it said illegal move in bright red letters.
It should at least make me laugh or have some variety or some trash talk or something.
Armed with the focus group's qualitative feedback, Creswell heads off to combine this with the participants' journals, which have been previously transcribed.
And you can see here where I have created 1-inch margins on each side so that I can write notes in. And you can kind of see I'm working with small sections here. And here they're beginning to talk about the illegal moves.
Creswell identifies over 60 kinds of comments and then organizes the comments by themes, seen here in bold.
If I had a larger database, I would have used one of the qualitative computer software programs.
He quickly designs a pilot survey which the participants take during a break. But now the participants are back for a second focus group.
A qualitative phase to help improve the quantitative instrument. Let's talk about this survey that you filled out. Have you got any thoughts about what you liked about it and what you didn't like, ways we can change it?
I don't know how to answer one of the questions. It's like how many times do you play the game every day? So actually sometimes I don't play the game, so I don't know how to answer that question.
So you may not play it every day.
No.
I had the same problem. I don't play necessarily every day.
I learned mostly that I needed to work on the background, the demographic questions at the beginning.
So let's summarize this mixed methods approach. 2 qualitative phases, a journal and a focus group, led to a pilot survey, a quantitative measure, which the focus group evaluated. A revised survey, the final quantitative phase, will now be given to a larger population. In short, the value of coin soccer was seen through a unique approach of combining quantitative and qualitative methodology. From healthcare and social science settings to schools, mixed methods research is now being used widely.
They all are beginning to see the value of gathering people's stories along with the numbers. Where do I see it in 10 years? I think it's going to be the dominant methodology. We always say in mixed methods you have a more complete picture of an understanding of the problem than either quantitative or qualitative by itself would yield.
As you saw in the video, there is space to bring together different aspects and components of quantitative and qualitative ways of doing social research. So, in other words, it is possible to break down the quantitative-qualitative divide. And even though the distinctions between these two ways of doing research exist, the epistemological and ontological commitments and assumptions of these ways of doing social research are not as deterministic as we thought. We will look in the next minutes into another example of how quantitative and qualitative strategies and methods can be brought together. We are now looking into a study titled The Culture of Nature and Meanings of Gardens, a Late Modernity. The study was conducted by two British researchers, Mark Bathy and Andrew Church. And what this study asked to do is to examine the significance of gardens and gardening to British people. They departed from the assumption or the understanding that gardening is a socially significant act of human agency. And people, when they do gardening, they cultivate relationships with the flora and the fauna in the place they do the gardening. So this study tried to understand the meanings and the significance of gardening for those who engage in that activity. And what is interesting about this study is that it combined quantitative and qualitative strategies and methods. In this study, the researchers Bathy and Church used a multi-strategy research design that combined quantitative and qualitative methods. And they used a strategy that is called filling in the gaps, which means that quantitative and qualitative research methods were used in a complementary manner. Basically, in the first stage of the research, the researchers collected data using quantitative methods, and then in a second stage of the research, they collected data using qualitative methods. As said, in the first stage of the research, they collected quantitative data. They used two different but connected quantitative methods. One is a structured interview with a mixture of open and closed questions. And the second method was a self-completion questionnaire. Their population, their sample population, was 150 people at 3 different garden centers in southeast of England. At the second stage of the research, the researcher visited an archive at the University of Sussex and conducted discourse analysis of a very rich dataset that include information about gardening behavior and practices. Eventually, they put together the findings from the first and the second stage and conducted an analysis based on both the quantitative and qualitative collected data. In combining quantitative and qualitative approaches to social research, there are a series of questions that we need to answer when we put together the research design. Among the most important question is, which one is the principal data gathering approach? Is the quantitative or the qualitative? Which kind of methods will be used first and which kind of methods will be used second? Is there any significance on the sequence of using different techniques? Which kind of priority we give to which approach? Many of these questions are generally answered by the type of research we are. If we generally tend to do social research using qualitative approaches, but we nevertheless may be using mixed strategies and methods, it could be assumed that our preference or priority will be given to the qualitative approach and methods. And as well, if we are researchers that tend to do mainly quantitative research, it should be assumed that we will give priority in the way we combine strategies and methods to the quantitative approach and to quantitative methods. There are different ways to combine quantitative and qualitative approaches and methods, and this is what we are going to discuss in the next minutes. We are now going to discuss about 8 different ways to combine quantitative and qualitative approaches and methods. This discussion follows our study text, Alan Bremen's book, chapter 26. Triangulation. This is the case when the results of one method are checked by using another method, each coming from a different approach, quantitative or qualitative. So for instance, we may have some data, statistical data, quantitative data about a population, but we want to make sure about the meaning, the significance of that data, and therefore we may conduct qualitative interviews with a sample of that population to check the veracity of that quantitative data. Offset and completeness. This is when quantitative and qualitative methods compensate for each other. For instance, let's assume certain ethnographers conducting observation of specific social practices of a group, but they are unable to understand everything that is going on there. So observation is not enough as a qualitative tool, and therefore they will go and use a more structured method, like for instance structured interviews, to gather more data and understand better that social practice that they were observing. process. In a study conducted in 2006, looking at differences between university students living at home and living away from home, the researcher first used a web-based questionnaire survey to provide a broad picture of the differences between these two types of students. Later on, a qualitative interview was conducted with focus group, which now is a qualitative method, in order to understand better the processes that lie behind the differences that were broadly revealed with the first method, the quantitative web-based questionnaire survey. Different research questions. In a research design, part of the questions could be oriented more to use a quantitative approach and methods, trying to capture the more general or macro picture of the topic that we are studying. And also in the same design, we may have research questions that are targeted to capture more the detailed, the micro phenomena of the topic that we are studying, which will be based on a qualitative approach and method. Explanation. Quantitative research generally tries to offer us an analysis that connects between two variables in a causal way, attempting to claim that A, for instance, has some form of correlation to B. But many times, this analysis lacks the detail of understanding better how actually that correlation between A and B function. This is where using qualitative tools and techniques can help us to reveal some intervening variables between A and B that help explaining better the correlation claimed by the quantitative method between A and B. Unexpected results. There are cases in which the analysis yields certain conclusions that are inconsistent with our hypotheses and assumptions. In these cases, we may use alternative methods from a different approach in order to try and explain better the conclusions we arrive at, which seem to be puzzling or inconsistent with our hypotheses and assumptions. So using a method or a series of methods from another approach, either quantitative or qualitative, may help us salvaging the research study itself. Instrument development. Let's say we want to develop a particular survey, that is, a quantitative method, to study the topic of internet use by children. But we are not sure of what exactly we should be asking in the survey. So we may use a qualitative method in order to develop the instrument we want to use, that is, the survey. For instance, we can organize a focus group or many focus groups with children, and in the focus group, which is a qualitative method, try to understand better which kind of questions we should be asking in a survey. So again, the use of the qualitative method, in the example, the focus group, will serve to develop the quantitative instrument, the survey. And lastly, sampling. Quantitative surveys, for instance questionnaires, can be used in order to select a group of people among a large population with whom we want to conduct qualitative interview. So in this case, the quantitative method is helping the research design in order to choose the right sample which will participate in the qualitative method, for instance, interviews. This is the end of lecture number 8.